I'm David Thompson, a 38-year-old craftsman from Ohio, and this is my story. A story I never imagined I'd tell, but one I feel compelled to share. It's about love, betrayal, and finding the strength to rebuild when everything falls apart. I met Emily at a coffee shop on a crisp autumn morning. She ordered a caramel latte, smiled at the barista, and turned to find a seat, only to realize the place was packed. I offered her mine, and she accepted with a warm smile. That was the moment my world shifted. From that day on, Emily became my everything. We dated for a year, married the next, and for 6 years, we built a life that felt solid and comforting. Every morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with her laughter, and every evening, we shared stories about our day. I thought we were happy. I was sure we were. But happiness, I've learned, can be an illusion. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. Emily was in the kitchen, her voice low but clear as she spoke to her sister Sarah. I wasn't eavesdropping, I just froze when I heard her say, "If I could go back, I wouldn't choose him." My heart stopped. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted with my life, was speaking about me with regret. I stood there, feeling the world tilt beneath my feet. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I retreated to our bedroom, lay next to her, and stared at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. The next morning, I woke to the same comforting coffee aroma and her familiar smile, but everything felt different. Suspicion has a way of poisoning even the most mundane moments. I noticed how she angled her phone away when she texted, how she suddenly needed to stay late at work more often. I told myself I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the seed of doubt had taken root, and it grew. One night, long after Emily had gone to bed, I walked into the kitchen to get some water. Her phone buzzed on the counter. I knew it was wrong, but I picked it up. The screen showed a message from someone named Ryan. "Can't stop thinking about you. Tomorrow night?" My stomach twisted. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, clutching the phone, reading the message over and over. Confronting her seemed impossible. The next day, I went to work and tried to pretend everything was fine. But the words haunted me. That night, Emily came home late, her eyes shining with an energy I hadn't seen in months. I asked how her day was. "Busy," she said, turning away quickly. I didn't push. I couldn't. But the pieces were falling into place. The late nights, the guarded phone, the distant look in her eyes. Days later, I overheard another conversation. This time, she was talking to Ryan. "I feel so stuck," she said softly. "David is safe, but I don't feel alive with him." I backed away from the door, my breath shallow. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand answers. Instead, I sat on the floor of our living room and let the truth sink in. The woman I loved was in love with someone else. I thought about confronting her, but what would that achieve? Her heart was already gone. So, I made a decision. That night, while she slept, I packed a bag. Just the essentials: clothes, my wallet, and a photo of us from our honeymoon in Colorado, when we were still us. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "I know the truth. I hope you find the excitement you're looking for. Sometimes, letting go is the first step to reclaiming yourself." Then I walked out of the house, out of the life we had built, and into the unknown. As I drove away, tears blurred my vision. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I couldn't stay. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired with apologies or explanations, and love without trust becomes a prison. This is my story, and I share it because heartbreak doesn't define us. It challenges us to rediscover who we are, and that's exactly what I set out to do. The days after I left Emily felt surreal, like living in a dream where nothing quite made sense. My name is David Thompson, and if you followed my story so far, you know that my marriage crumbled the moment I heard my wife say she wouldn't choose me again. Now, I was alone, trying to make sense of the betrayal that shattered everything I thought was solid. People often say that love blinds you, but no one warns you about the clarity that comes after the illusion breaks. In the first few days, I wandered through life in a haze. My rented apartment smelled of fresh paint and emptiness. I had moved into a small one-bedroom unit on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the cozy house Emily and I had made into a home. The silence was oppressive. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her face when we exchanged vows, promising to choose each other every day. I wondered when she had stopped choosing me. Had it been months, years, or maybe she never truly chose me at all? The nights were the worst. Sleep became an elusive luxury, replaced by a restless battle between painful memories and unanswered questions. I kept replaying our conversations, looking for the moment when everything shifted. Was it when I started working longer hours to save for our future? Or when she switched jobs and met Ryan? The uncertainty gnawed at me. One night, around 3 a.m., I sat on the floor, back against the wall with an old photograph in my hand. It was from our honeymoon in Colorado. We stood at the edge of a mountain trail, grinning at the camera, arms wrapped around each other. Was that happiness real, or was it just me believing in a lie? I whispered into the void. The silence didn't answer, but the ache in my chest deepened. In the mornings, I forced myself out of bed and into a routine. I found an old toolbox in the storage room and bought some scrap wood from a local lumber yard. Woodworking had been my hobby once, a creative outlet that demanded patience and focus, two things I desperately needed now. I spent hours sanding, cutting, and shaping wood into chairs and tables. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against grain became my meditation. With every smooth surface I created, I felt a small piece of my fractured self coming together. But the loneliness lingered. I hadn't told many people about the separation. My friend Jake called often, his voice filled with concern. "David, you don't have to go through this alone," he said one evening. "Come out with us, get some fresh air, meet new people." I wanted to say yes, but the thought of pretending to be okay exhausted me. "Maybe next time," I replied, knowing full well I wouldn't go. Days blurred into weeks, and the weight of Emily's betrayal settled like a stone in my chest. I couldn't escape the question that haunted me. Why wasn't I enough? It's a dangerous question, one that erodes self-worth if left unchecked. I realized I needed help, so I booked an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Thompson. Sitting across from her in that small, softly lit office felt strange at first. "Tell me what brings you here," she said, voice calm and steady. I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "My wife cheated on me. I left, and now I don't know who I am without her." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Dr. Thompson nodded, giving me space to process what I had just admitted. Over the following weeks, I began to untangle the knots of pain and confusion. I talked about how I met Emily, how I believed we had a solid foundation. I described the moment I overheard her on the phone with her sister, the gut-wrenching discovery that I was merely the safe option she regretted choosing. "It wasn't about you," Dr. Thompson said one session. "Her actions reflect her unmet needs, not your inadequacies." I wanted to believe her, but the scars ran deep. The days after I left were a blur. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, a stark contrast to the warmth of the home I had shared with Emily. I spent the first few nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. How had I missed the signs? How had our love, once so vibrant, become something she regretted? The questions circled endlessly, offering no answers, only pain. The silence of the apartment was suffocating. At home, there had always been the hum of conversation, the clink of dishes, the soft murmur of the TV. Now the only sound was my own breathing, and occasionally the dull thud of my heart against my chest. I tried to distract myself, reading, watching movies, scrolling through social media, but nothing held my attention. My mind was stuck in that moment when I heard her say she felt trapped, that I didn't make her feel alive. One evening, unable to bear the stillness, I grabbed the keys and drove. I didn't know where I was going until I ended up in front of the park where Emily and I had shared our first picnic. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there for hours, watching families play and couples walk hand in hand. I wondered if she was with him now. I wondered if she laughed with him the way she used to laugh with me. The thought burned. Betrayal isn't just the loss of trust. It's the cruel revelation that your shared memories are no longer sacred. The next day, I called Jake, my closest friend. "I can't do this alone," I admitted, my voice breaking. Jake showed up within the hour with pizza and beer. We sat in silence for a while before he said, "You're going to get through this, man. It feels impossible now, but you will." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of my heart suggested otherwise. Days turned into weeks. I threw myself into woodworking, something I had always loved, but never pursued seriously. The scent of sawdust became oddly comforting. I spent hours crafting tables, chairs, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind distracted. The rhythmic sound of the saw cut through my thoughts, providing brief moments of peace. But the nights remained brutal. Memories of Emily's smile haunted me. Her absence was like a phantom limb, intangible but persistent. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I scrolled through her social media. There it was. A picture of her at a company event, standing beside Ryan. Her smile was familiar, yet different. Brighter? Or was I imagining it? I closed the app, ashamed of my weakness. Knowing more wouldn't change the past, but part of me still searched for answers. The hardest part was the self-blame. I replayed every argument, every missed opportunity to connect. Had I become too predictable, too comfortable? I remembered the nights I chose work over date night. The weekends I was too tired to plan something special. But as Dr. Thompson, my therapist, later reminded me, her choices reflect her, not you. Relationships thrive on mutual effort, and when one person gives up, no amount of perfection on your part can fix it. Therapy became my lifeline. I went every Thursday, sitting across from Dr. Thompson in his cozy office. He had a calm, steady demeanor that made it easier to share the messiness of my emotions. He didn't offer easy answers, but helped me see patterns, to understand that trust, once broken, requires more than promises to rebuild. One session, I mentioned the sentence that haunted me the most. "He's safe, but doesn't make me feel alive." Dr. Thompson leaned back and said, "David, what does alive mean to you?" The question threw me. I had always equated love with consistency, loyalty, and shared goals. I realized Emily had been searching for something more fleeting, excitement, spontaneity, perhaps the thrill of the unknown. We had loved differently, and in that difference, we had lost each other. Around this time, Sarah, Emily's sister, called. I hesitated to answer, but eventually picked up. "David, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tight with guilt. We met at a diner downtown, and she confessed what I had suspected. Emily's affair hadn't been a brief lapse. It had been going on for months. "She said she felt trapped," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "But I think she was just scared of the stability. You were the safe bet, and she didn't want safe." I thanked her for her honesty, though the truth cut deep. Safety, it seemed, had become a flaw in Emily's eyes. That night, I returned home, stood in my tiny kitchen, and let the truth settle. I had given my best, but it hadn't been what she wanted, and that was okay. Love isn't about morphing into someone else's ideal. It's about finding someone who cherishes you as you are. The realization didn't erase the pain, but it lessened the self-blame. The following weekend, I drove to the mountains and hiked a familiar trail. At the summit, the crisp air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. I stood there, overlooking the vast landscape, and whispered, "I am enough." The wind carried my words into the distance, and I chose to believe them. The road to healing was long, but I had taken the first step. The past would always be part of me, but it would no longer define me. Betrayal had broken me, but I was learning to rebuild, One day, one wooden plank, one deep breath at a time. The night I came back from the mountains, something shifted. For months I'd felt like a ghost haunting my own life, stuck in the past, trapped by memories that no longer served me. But standing on that summit, whispering, "I am enough," into the wind, I realized it was time to start living again, not just surviving. The pain hadn't disappeared. It still sat in my chest like a cold stone, but I no longer wanted it to define me. The next morning I woke up early, made coffee, and stood by the window as the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. I sipped my drink and thought about how, not so long ago, Emily would have been beside me, making a joke about how sunrises look better on Instagram. The memory stung, but this time it didn't crush me. I acknowledged the hurt, let it breathe, and then let it go. That day, I drove to a lumberyard across town and bought several thick slabs of oak and walnut. I'd always loved woodworking, but it had become more than a hobby. It was my therapy. The tactile nature of sanding, cutting, and shaping wood grounded me. Each piece of furniture I created was a testament to resilience. Wood, like the heart, could splinter and crack, but with care and patience, it could also be transformed into something strong and beautiful. Hours later, sawdust covered my jeans, and my arms ached from sanding. I ran my hand along the smooth surface of a tabletop and smiled for the first time in days. Progress wasn't always visible in the moment, but it was there, beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. That evening, I got a call from Jake. "Hey man," he said, "there's an art fair downtown this weekend. Want to check it out?" My first instinct was to decline. Socializing still felt like a foreign concept, but something in me hesitated. "Yeah, sure," I said, surprising myself. Saturday arrived, and I met Jake by the fountain in the town square. The fair buzzed with life. Artists displayed paintings, sculptures, and photographs, while families wandered past food stalls selling kettle corn and lemonade. The scent of roasted almonds filled the air. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an outsider watching life pass me by. I was part of it again. We stopped at a booth displaying black and white photographs of landscapes and cityscapes. A woman with chestnut hair stood behind the table, adjusting the frames. One picture caught my eye. A solitary wooden bench under a sprawling oak tree, shadows stretching across the ground like long-forgotten memories. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the woman said, noticing my gaze. "It is," I replied, tracing the lines of the photo with my eyes. "There's something peaceful about it." "That's what I thought when I took it," she said, smiling softly. "I wanted to capture that sense of stillness." She extended her hand. "I'm Megan." "David," I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes warm and curious. Jake, sensing the moment, excused himself to grab a hot dog. Megan and I continued talking. I told her about my woodworking, and she shared how photography helped her stay present. "You know," she said after a while, "there's a lot of similarity between photography and woodworking. Both require patience and attention to detail." "Yeah," I agreed, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. "And both remind you that the process is just as important as the final result." We exchanged numbers before I left. I didn't expect her to text, but she did. A simple, "It was great meeting you today, David." I stared at the message for a moment, heart racing, then replied, "Same here, Megan. Let me know if you ever want a custom frame for one of your photos." Her response came quickly. "Deal." The next few weeks were a strange mix of old routines and new emotions. I still worked late into the night, the sound of the saw my constant companion. But now, I also found myself checking my phone, hoping for messages from Megan. We texted about everything: woodworking, photography, life. One evening, she sent me a photo of a street lamp glowing in the rain. "Captured this tonight," she wrote. "There's something magical about rainy nights." I hesitated before replying. I wanted to share something personal, something real. "Rainy nights used to feel lonely," I typed, then paused. Before I could second-guess myself, I added, "Now, they remind me that storms pass." She responded with a simple heart emoji. Our first official date was at a quiet cafe downtown. I was nervous, worried that the shadows of my past would intrude. But Megan's laughter was contagious, and soon we were swapping stories about childhood adventures and travel mishaps. When she asked about my marriage, I hesitated. But instead of dodging the topic, I told her the truth about the betrayal, the pain, and the slow process of healing. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said, her eyes filled with genuine empathy. "Thanks," I said, gripping my coffee cup. "It's still a work in progress. Aren't we all?" she said, smiling gently. That night, I walked her to her car. As she unlocked the door, she turned to me. "You know, David, strength isn't about never breaking. It's about how you rebuild." Her words echoed in my mind long after she drove away. The following weekend, I finished a chair I'd been working on for months. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my skin. It was imperfect, but solid. Like me. Like life. Megan sent me a photo the next day. This one of the sunrise. Golden light, breaking through heavy clouds. The caption read, "New beginnings often hide in familiar places." I smiled, realizing that maybe, just maybe, I was ready for mine. The weeks after meeting Megan were a strange mixture of hope and hesitation. I found myself smiling at my phone when her name appeared, our conversations effortless and genuine. Yet every time I felt myself relax into the connection, a voice in my head whispered warnings. "Don't get too comfortable. You've been here before. Trust, once broken, doesn't just mend itself overnight. It requires time, patience, and a willingness to believe in something you can't see." Therapy helped. Dr. Thompson often reminded me, "Healing isn't linear, David. There will be good days and setbacks. The key is not to judge yourself for either." I clung to those words on the nights when Emily's voice haunted me, when memories of her betrayal crept in like a cold draft through a cracked window. But each morning, as sunlight filtered through my apartment blinds, I reminded myself that the past couldn't hurt me unless I let it. I immersed myself in woodworking more than ever. The grain of the wood beneath my fingers was grounding, a tangible, honest texture that never pretended to be anything it wasn't. I worked on intricate designs, pouring my emotions into every curve and joint. One evening, Megan sent me a photo of a misty forest path with the caption, "Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations." I stared at the image for a long time, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. Megan and I continued meeting, sometimes for coffee, other times for long walks through the park. She was curious about my work, often asking about the techniques behind my furniture. One afternoon, she visited my workshop. She ran her fingers along a polished oak table, eyes wide with admiration. "You know," she said, "wood has its own memory. Every knot and line tells a story." Her observation struck me. Wood, like hearts, bore the marks of its history. But those imperfections could become sources of beauty when treated with care. Despite the growing warmth between us, I couldn't shake the fear of history repeating itself. One night, after dinner at her place, she noticed my unease. "You're holding back," she said gently. I hesitated before answering. "It's not you," I said, voice tight. "It's me. I'm scared of trusting again." Megan reached for my hand. "I get it," she said. "But not everyone is Emily, and not every story ends the same way." Her words, simple yet profound, echoed in my mind long after I left her apartment. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a therapy session. I was describing my reluctance to fully open up when Dr. Thompson said, "David, what do you think you're protecting yourself from?" I opened my mouth to answer, but couldn't. The question lingered. Later that night, I sat in my workshop, sanding the leg of a chair, when the realization hit me. I wasn't just afraid of being hurt again. I was afraid of losing myself the way I had with Emily. I had bent so much to fit into the mold of the perfect, safe husband that I'd lost touch with who I really was. The next time I saw Megan, I told her everything. I don't want to lose myself in a relationship again, I admitted, voice trembling. She squeezed my hand. Then don't, she said. Stay true to who you are, and I'll do the same. That's how we build something real. The following weekend, Megan invited me to a photography exhibition. As we walked through the gallery, I noticed how she interacted with each image, seeing stories in still moments. We stopped in front of a picture of a cracked, weathered bench. Why this one? I asked. She smiled softly. Because it's imperfect but enduring, like life. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and, for the first time in a long time, felt the warmth of hope without the chill of fear. Healing, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, carrying the scars with grace, and stepping forward with courage. Wood, hearts, and trust. They all share this truth. What's broken can be made whole again, if given enough care. And I was finally ready to give life that chance. Megan and I settled into an easy rhythm over the following months. Our conversations stretched from casual chats about our favorite foods to deep discussions about life and loss. She had a way of grounding me, of pulling me out of my thoughts when I drifted back into the shadows of the past. Yet, even as our connection deepened, I found myself hesitating. There was always a small, guarded part of me that held back. I remember one evening vividly. We were sitting on a park bench after dinner, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Megan leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. You know, she said softly, you can trust me, David. I'm not her. I stiffened for a moment, startled by her perceptiveness. I opened my mouth to respond but found no words. Trust isn't built through reassurance alone. It requires action, risk, and time. The next day, I lost myself in the workshop. I started working on a chair, something simple but sturdy. As I carved the wood, I thought about the layers of trust. Wood, like relationships, needed a strong foundation. Cut corners, rush the process, and the structure would eventually collapse. I sanded the edges meticulously, focusing on each curve and groove, reminding myself that trust needed the same care and attention. Megan was patient. She didn't push, but gave me space to process my emotions. One afternoon, she brought her camera to the workshop. Mind if I take a few shots? She asked, already adjusting the lens. I shrugged, pretending nonchalance, but secretly enjoyed how her presence softened the sharp edges of the room. She crouched beside the workbench, capturing the details of the wood grain and the tools scattered across the table. Later, she showed me a picture of my hands gripping a chisel. These hands tell a story, she said, of resilience, of creating beauty from brokenness. Her words stayed with me. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how deeply she saw me, not just as the man rebuilding his life, but as someone with the strength to shape a new future. One weekend, Megan invited me on a photography trip to the coast. I hesitated at first. Traveling together felt like a step into unfamiliar territory, but her excitement was contagious. We left early Saturday morning, the car filled with the scent of coffee and the sound of old rock ballads. The closer we got to the ocean, the lighter I felt, as if the salty breeze was carrying away the last remnants of my fear. We spent the day walking along the shore. Megan darted ahead, snapping pictures of seagulls, weathered driftwood, and the waves crashing against jagged rocks. I stood back, watching her in her element. The joy in her expression, the way she tilted her head to find the perfect angle. It reminded me of the importance of passion, of finding something that makes your soul come alive. That evening, we sat on the sand, wrapped in a blanket, as the sky darkened. The rhythmic sound of the waves filled the silence between us. Megan tilted her head toward me. You don't talk much about your dreams, she said. I hesitated before answering. I guess I forgot how to dream for a while, I admitted. But lately, I've been thinking about opening my own workshop, making custom pieces, maybe teaching woodworking classes. Her face lit up. That sounds amazing, David. You should do it. Her belief in me felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The next few weeks were filled with planning. I researched locations, crunched numbers, and sketched designs for the shop's interior. Megan helped with the branding, suggesting names and logo concepts. We laughed over bad ideas like Dave's Dusty Designs, and eventually settled on Timber and Soul. The name felt right, a reflection of how woodwork, like life, requires heart and craftsmanship. The grand opening was scheduled for early spring. The night before, I stood in the empty workshop, running my fingers along the polished counters. Memories of Emily and the betrayal that had shattered me surfaced briefly. But this time, they didn't sting as much. I'd rebuilt myself, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it. Megan arrived with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. We stood in the middle of the shop, toasting to new beginnings. "I'm proud of you," she said, eyes glistening. I squeezed her hand. "I wouldn't have gotten here without you." The next morning, customers streamed in, admiring the handcrafted tables and chairs. I demonstrated tools to curious children and discussed custom orders with adults who appreciated the art of woodworking. Megan flitted around with her camera, capturing candid moments of laughter and wonder. Near the end of the day, a woman walked in. It took me a moment to recognize her. Emily. My chest tightened, but I remained still. She looked around, her eyes lingering on a walnut coffee table. Finally, she approached. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded. "I forgave you a long time ago, Emily. Not for you, for me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she simply nodded and left. Megan appeared by my side moments later. "Who was that?" she asked. "Just someone from my past," I said, taking her hand. "But the past doesn't define me anymore." That night I carved a small inscription into the underside of the walnut table. New beginnings are built with steady hands and open hearts. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, undeniably free. The morning sunlight poured through the workshop windows, casting long golden streaks across the floorboards. I stood beside the walnut chair I'd just finished, running my hand over the smooth, polished surface. The wood, with its natural lines and knots, told a story of time, growth, and resilience. I had chosen walnut for this particular piece because of its strength, a reminder of the journey that had brought me here. It had been a year since I walked away from the ashes of my marriage, a year since I had packed my bag and left that note on the kitchen counter. So much had changed since then. Timber and Soul, my woodworking shop, was thriving. Orders came in faster than I could fulfill them. People seemed drawn to the craftsmanship, to the authenticity of something made by hand. Megan said it was because every piece carried a part of my story. Maybe she was right. Megan. Just thinking about her made me smile. She had become an integral part of my life, not as a replacement for what I'd lost, but as a testament to what I could find when I opened my heart again. She never pressured me to move faster than I was ready. Instead, she met me where I was, walking beside me as I rediscovered life beyond heartbreak. I heard the doorbell chime and looked up to see her standing there, camera bag slung over her shoulder and a cup of coffee in each hand. "Morning, craftsman," she greeted, handing me one of the cups. "Morning, artist," I replied, taking a sip. The warmth spread through me, and not just from the coffee. She walked over to the walnut chair and admired it. "This might be my favorite piece yet." "Yeah?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "It feels grounded, like it's been through a lot, but came out stronger." Her words struck a chord. That was exactly how I felt standing there in my workshop next to her, coffee in hand, and heart unexpectedly full. "I guess that's what life does," I said softly. "Breaks you, shapes you, and if you let it, makes you stronger." Megan smiled and raised her cup. "To strength," she said. "To strength," I echoed. Later that afternoon, I sat on the workbench, scrolling through old photos on my phone. One image stopped me, a snapshot from 3 years ago. Emily and me at a friend's barbecue, both of us laughing, unaware of the cracks beneath the surface. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. That chapter of my life, painful as it was, had taught me lessons I wouldn't trade for anything. I remembered what Dr. Thompson had once said. Forgiveness isn't about condoning what happened. It's about releasing yourself from the grip of the past. I had carried the weight of betrayal long enough. It was time to set it down. That evening, Megan and I sat on my back porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple. The air was cool, and the faint scent of pine lingered. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "All the time," I admitted. "What do you see?" she asked. I thought about the workshop expanding, teaching woodworking classes to kids, maybe even building furniture for local schools. I thought about quiet mornings with Megan, cups of coffee in hand, and shared laughter that didn't need explanations. And I thought about family, a home filled with warmth, honesty, and trust. "I see a life I'm proud of," I said finally. "A life that's real." Megan leaned her head on my shoulder. "That sounds perfect." As the stars began to appear, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. Emily's name. The text read, "Hope you're doing well. I'm sorry for everything." I stared at the words for a moment, my pulse quickening. Then I turned off the phone and set it down without responding. Megan squeezed my hand. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, lacing my fingers through hers. "Just closing a door." The stars above us twinkled like silent witnesses to the moment. I thought about how wood, no matter how carefully shaped, would always bear marks of its past. But those marks didn't make it weak. They gave it character, strength, and authenticity. I had been broken, yes. But like the wood I worked with each day, I had been reshaped, strengthened by the journey. And as I sat there, hand in hand with Megan, I realized something profound. Happiness doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from embracing life, scars and all. The past was a chapter, the present a gift, and the future a story waiting to be written, one steady, honest stroke at a time. Looking back, I've learned that love is never guaranteed. It's not a static state, but a living, breathing connection that requires honesty, effort, and mutual respect. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it rarely returns unchanged. But pain, as devastating as it feels, can become a catalyst for growth. My journey through heartbreak taught me that letting go is not a sign of weakness. It's a declaration of self-worth. Forgiving Emily wasn't easy. I didn't do it for her. I did it for myself. Carrying resentment is like gripping a shard of glass. The longer you hold on, the deeper it cuts. I had to release it to heal, to reclaim the parts of me that were buried beneath betrayal. Today, my heart feels different. More cautious, yes, but also more aware. Megan came into my life when I least expected it, reminding me that love built on authenticity has a quiet, enduring strength. She never tried to fix me. She simply walked beside me as I rebuilt myself. Now, I want to turn the conversation to you. Have you ever experienced a moment when trust was shattered? How did you navigate the path to healing? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected. Life is a collection of stories, and each of us has one worth telling.